Welcome, everyone, to our conversation on the very real language behind so-called reform and disability policy, particularly in the NDIS space.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
that kind of translation where words that sound hopeful often hide a shift of burden.
Right. It's like when you hear reform and all you get is more paperwork and delays instead of real support, yes?
Absolutely. Take, for example, phrases like fairer and more consistent. In plain terms, that means more standardized processes.
Mm,
Consistency is only good if the system is built to handle complex, nuanced needs. Otherwise, it just standardizes mistakes.
that's a crucial point. And when they say easier to use, it almost always turns out to be about making it easier for the system to administrate everything, not for the participants' benefit.
Exactly. Now let's talk about reducing red tape. Instead of actually, eliminating bureaucratic burdens, it often means moving the tape somewhere else, right onto the shoulders of participants, families, and support providers.
Cheltenham. And that's where things get really frustrating because families who are already under pressure suddenly become responsible for more forms and more bureaucratic hoops.
Right? It's like they're trying to cover up systemic issues with fancy language. And then we have phrases like improving integrity. This sounds great until you realize it's often a euphemism for increased
Yep.
surveillance. Instead of meaningful support, it becomes prove your disability again, but faster.
I mean, isn't there a risk that all this emphasis on surveillance can actually worsen the situation? It feels like it's punishing those very people the system is supposed to help.
Absolutely, and that brings us to participant centered. Now, in theory, that should mean that evidence is heard, decisions are explained, and reviews make sense. But if the person is stuck fighting a machine that gives no real explanations or timely reviews, then it's just like branding without practice.
hmm I actually sometimes wonder if these reforms might have a silver lining. I mean, couldn't genuine reform be, transformative?
That's a fair challenge. In some instances, true reform can indeed improve systems, but more often it ends up shifting the burden further onto those already fighting exhaustion and never ending unpaid labor.
Right, exactly. So essentially, these press releases and policy announcements are designed to sound soothing and reassuring, while in reality, they fail to actually provide support like real changes, such as adequate funding or hands on assistance.
Yes, yeah, it's like they're offering comfort in words but not in action. And then we get to what I'd call the core of the issue. The system's comfort may be superficial, but remember, support in true terms is about things you rely on every day, like hours of personal care, stable housing, the right equipment, and proper therapy.
Exactly. Support is tangible assistance, yet when reform shifts administrative burdens, it steals the very thing that families desperately need: time.
Right, time being the hidden currency here. The system seems to believe there's endless time, which in practice is far from the truth for those managing day to day challenges.
Yes. Let's dive a little deeper into where this reform, when it hits on the ground, is most noticeable. What's your take on that?
Well, reform tends to hit in three main areas. First, look at the evidence requirements. People are told it's simpler, but if your needs are complex, that means more paperwork to be taken seriously.
Yeah, that's something I've heard repeatedly. Right. And then there are the planning conversations and assessments. The system often prioritizes standard outputs rather than the varied, detailed evidence of an individual's lived experience. That leaves those with uncommon needs feeling flattened.
Exactly. And then we see it in reviews and delays. Any system change usually comes with increased delays and confusion, which forces families to shoulder even more responsibility to keep things ticking along.
Precisely. That's really the heart wrenching aspect. People often quietly fall through these cracks.
Indeed. And then there's the mini glossary of caution words that should make anyone pause. Let's
Yeah,
run
let's do
through a
that.
few, shall we? For instance, streamlining really means less nuance and faster decisions, often sacrificing like the quality of individual support, not necessarily improving it.
And when they talk about targeted supports, that typically implies a narrowing of eligibility criteria. It's a bit like saying, we'll help, but only if you fit a certain profile, right?
Absolutely. Then you have budget sustainability, which in practice translates to cuts framed as responsibilities, and oversight is really just more hoops to jump through.
Yes. And let's not forget efficiency, essentially doing it cheaper rather than better. When you strip out nuance, you risk losing the kind of human touch that real support requires.
Right? And all these terms, none of them are neutral. They're maps of where power and the load are shifting.
hmm I do wonder, though, isn't it possible that some of these reforms could be tweaked to actually help if implemented with proper participant input? I mean, aren't there arguments for tightening processes to avoid fraud?
That's a valid consideration. Integrity matters and fraud can be an issue. But when the measures for integrity become barriers, forcing people to prove their needs repeatedly without any real safeguard, it's detrimental. It's like trying to balance security without locking out those who need help most.
Yes, exactly. It's a tough balancing act. The language used in these policies signals where the burden really lands. And sadly, it's rarely on the administrators, but on the families and participants.
Exactly. And then we come to what participants truly deserve: clear reasons for decisions, transparency about what evidence is used and how it's weighted, accessible and timely review pathways, and support that aligns with lived realities.
Right. Not to mention safeguards that don't turn families into full time administrators. That responsibility shouldn't fall on them at all.
Correct. And this is why platforms like ours exist. To amplify voices often silenced by bureaucratic absurdity, we translate the policy language into what it actually means on the ground.
Yeah, it's critical. When you hear phrases like reform in press releases, it's vital to decode them so that participants aren't left to navigate chaos alone.
Right? It's not enough for reforms to be spoken about in comforting terms. Real support comes from tangible help, hours of service, reliable equipment, real practice planning, and not from abstract promises.
That's the fundamental takeaway. Words may sound positive, but they can mask a shift of burdens that leaves the most vulnerable with even less time and fewer resources.
Yes, exactly. And by scrutinizing phrases like fairer and more consistent or efficiency, we expose how these changes might, in practice, undermine support by transferring responsibility onto those who already give everything they have.
It's a critical reminder that reform isn't inherently good. It must always be measured by whether it genuinely improves lives rather than simply restructuring responsibilities.
Well said. And as we continue to advocate, it's important that everyone affected, participants, families, support workers, has a voice in this conversation. If reforms are to be truly transformative, they need to come with real practical support that doesn't justify itself with empty press releases.
Absolutely. And with platforms that listen and translate policy into everyday consequences, there's hope that more voices will shape future changes for the better.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the language of reform in the NDIS context. Remember, behind every reassuring announcement is a need for critical examination to ensure that support, real tangible support, is finally, delivered.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope this conversation helped peel back the layers of jargon to reveal what's really at stake. Because real reform has to mean more than just new words.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep questioning, keep advocating, and remember, words matter, but actions matter even more.